Hi folks, Rudy Green here. I have not done a video update in several months, so I thought I'd just hop on here and just post a quick status of what happened this summer and what I'm working on next. So the last time I went boots on the ground was on June 15th, and I've not posted a video since then, but I have excluded my search area. I've posted the solve that I was using online. I put it on Reddit, and just to sort of kind of clear it out of my brain and let myself work on new ideas, because I'm always working on an idea, usually about a half a dozen ideas at any given time. So if anyone's interested in reading that solve, it's one of several that I checked out, but the one I was primarily working on, the others were more just scouting ones because I wanted to kind of get a feel for some other spaces that I hadn't visited yet. But if you're curious about that solve, you can hop onto Reddit and look for my Red Canyon solve. It's not unique areas, but it's sort of a unique way I put it all together to come up with a final spot. However, now that that's out of the way, it's hard to get your mind into a new track of a new idea. And so what I did is I kind of just set aside everything that was sort of half cooked and not fully put together and went back to where warm waters halt. That's where we always just end up stuck back there after a summer of multiple failed boots on the ground. So I went back and read everything that I could come up with that Forrest had said about where warm waters halt, and trying to not so much to look for hints or anything. I don't think Forrest points us in a direction, but he excludes different things, or has excluded different things over time. And I thought sort of refreshing all of that would give me a broad, big picture again of where warm waters halt. Now, I'm not going to bring up anything that you haven't heard before, but I'm going to point out a few things that I found interesting, and then I'll tell you my conclusions and how I tied them together and an idea that I'm working on. And I'm just going to disclose it. I haven't fully fleshed it out yet, but we'll see if anybody else has come up with this before. So I'm going to go over the statements that I thought were interesting that, again, not hinting towards a spot, but telling us at least what warm waters halt isn't, gives us a pathway to excluding ideas and throwing out ideas that wouldn't be useful to research further. So let me start. I'm just going to kind of go off of memory of what I recall, because that's going to be the easiest way than me delaying here and looking all of these up. Anyone who's a serious searcher is going to be familiar with the statements that I'm going to recite as best I can remember. The first one is the comment about there are many places where warm waters halt. In my mind, this excludes all these singular geological features that people have come up with. That's wetting of the waters, that's Triple Divide Peak and Isa Lake and Sinks Canyon. These types of places that they're very fascinating, water features in the Rocky Mountains, but they don't exactly, there's certainly not many of them unless you simplify the concept down to just the idea of a stream, in which case it's not helpful at all. And I don't think Forrest picked something that was particularly noteworthy. I think he's guiding us to a spot that's important to him, not necessarily to other people. So I think you can throw out all of these features where there's only one of in. Again, you've heard this before, but I'm gonna keep building on it until I get to an idea that I'll share here at the end. The second one is, what was the second one? The second one is when somebody once asked if the person who had solved the first two clues just got lucky, or if they had sort of accidentally figured it out. I don't remember the exact phrase in the question, but I do remember Forrest's response fairly accurately. And he basically said yes to both. He said that there are people who walked me through the ways that they arrived at their conclusions, and then others arrived at the starting point, but they were oblivious to its connection to the poem. This has been analyzed before, but probably more so than any other statement, this is one that should make you rethink whatever it is you've picked as where warm waters halt. Because if searchers, if we take it in a purely literal way, and I think I don't think he was being cagey in this response necessarily. If we take it in a purely literal way, it sounds like Forrest is saying that searchers have been to where warm waters halt and they didn't know that they were at where warm waters halt, which is ludicrous. I mean, how does that even happen? I've traveled around quite a bit in the search area. I've been boots on the ground in 3 different states. I have not been boots on the ground in New Mexico, but I've been to New Mexico. And ever since I got into the chase, anytime I see warm or waters or brown or blaze or any words that are like similar to that, it sort of like catches up in my brain and goes, oh, is there another angle there that you haven't examined yet? So it seems really far-fetched that a searcher could arrive at where warm waters halt and not make the connection to the poem. Now, maybe make the connection, they were oblivious to the connection of the poem. Maybe it just means they didn't understand where to go next, but it doesn't really sound like that the way he phrased it. It really sounds like Forrest is saying that people have been to where warm waters halt and they weren't aware that they were at where warm waters halt. Well, if that presumption is the case, what does that tell us? I think that tells us that all of these thermal related where warm waters halts are out. That's Ojo Caliente, that's hot springs, that's warm springs. Certainly no searcher would show up at a hot spring and in the search area and not at least think about, is this where warm waters halts? Even if you don't use thermal features for your where warm waters halts, you're always at least thinking about it. So I see there's some chat coming up here. I'm going to finish my rant here and then we'll talk some more. I'll see what comments are being made. Even places that I didn't think were where warm waters halt, when I've driven past them, you know, every time I've gone searching, never searched in Yellowstone, but every time I've gone searching that area, I visited Yellowstone. It was not my search area, but I couldn't help but think, stopping at the Boiling River and then driving down the canyon, which is a really epic drive all the way down to the arch there. You can't help but think, I wonder if this is connected to the poem. Even if it's not something you've researched, it's certainly in the back of your mind when you're visiting these spaces. So I think you can rule out any of those areas that would be obvious. Look at your where warm waters halt and say, if another searcher was here, would they consider this as a possible where warm waters halt? That kind of then throws it out. There's got to be like one layer further in here. And the one idea that I came upon, and I haven't researched this very much yet, so if this is the right idea, you're hearing it here. What if, and hear me out, what if where warm waters halt is referring to a campsite or a campground? Here's why this would be interesting. A lot of the searchers that are going out, particularly the less wealthy ones of us, I spent all my money on a replica chest, so I can't afford any more boots on the ground. A lot of us are out in very rural areas and we are camping and staying in campsites in various places like this. What if where warm waters halt was actually referring to a campsite or a campground? It's not a structure per se. So even if you're all 9 clues are not a structure person, you could define that as not a structure by certain methodologies. Most campsites are made by some sort of waterway. Either I can't think of any that I stayed in on any of the searches, and I've stayed in campgrounds all over the different search areas, including Colorado, Wyoming, and Montana, and they were all beside water, every single one of them. The other thing that's interesting is usually when people are looking at the first clue, begin at where warm waters halt, they tend to focus more on the warm than the halt. I know halt's been analyzed a lot, but in most solves, it seems like they're stretching some definition of that to make it work. And when you read particularly older literature, like the Lewis and Clark journals, or what's the other one mentioned in Forrest Looking for Lewis and Clark's story? Journal of a Fur Trapper by Osborne Russell. These guys described, they use the word halt a lot of times to refer when they stop for the night. And so halt in this case is the water compelling people to stop. It's a little bit of an imaginative idea, but it doesn't seem outside the realm of possibility. And this would be a really good explanation for why somebody could go to Where Warm Waters Halt and not know that they're at Where Warm Waters Halt. So that's one idea I've been working on. I would say it's not one that's I've seen brought up before. So if somebody else is working on that, maybe I'm not the first. I did do a sort of loose search just to look at all the named campgrounds with water features in their name, like a lake or creek is pretty common. People who have searched West Yellowstone are familiar with some very specific campsites. You've got the Beaver Creek one and Cabin Creek. There's a lot of campsites with the name of the water feature that they're next to just baked right into the name of the campsite. The other thing that could point here is word definitions. The word halt essentially means to stop, but in some usages of it, halt can be a noun or a verb. It means a temporary stop. And if you look up the definition for camp or campground, it is a temporary place to stay. So they're actually kind of linked by that word temporary. So that's what I'm working on next. As I said, I've researched a few of the locations. Nothing jumped out, obviously, but it seems like that could fit a couple of the different things that Forrest has said, especially if you interpret his comments about people not understanding Where Warm Waters Halt's connection to the poem as being a spot where a searcher stopped, but they weren't aware that they were at Where Warm Waters Halt. And one last thing, one word that was interesting in Forrest's wording is he said that others have arrived at the starting point. It's interesting the use of word of arrived, because arrived sort of infers an intended destination. It's as if the searcher traveled to Where Warm Waters Halt and then went and searched elsewhere, maybe somewhere nearby, which sounds kind of silly, but again, the campground explanation could tie into that, especially if you don't mind using name features in the solve. Maybe it'd be worth looking up old maps to see what campgrounds were around. We know there's one mentioned in the book where Forrest's family stayed, the Fishing Bridge campground, which has since been relocated elsewhere, as I understand. I remember driving nearby there. I don't think there's a campground there anymore. Pretty sure I heard that it got moved due to environmental reasons or something like that. So anyways, that is my thought. I'm getting ready for a long, long winter here again of trying to write an entirely new solution to this crazy puzzle. Alan Kay's in the room. He suggested maybe Where Warm Waters Halt is the entrance to his special place, but the searchers that entered it didn't know it. Yeah, I tend to agree, actually. I'm going to tell you one more theory that I have. I think I may have posted this online already, but I'm going to break it down a little bit. So stanza 1 is oftentimes just more or less tossed out by people, and I understand why. It doesn't really... It kind of reads like a preamble, and it sounds like it's telling us stuff we don't already know, or we already know, such as that, Forrest went somewhere and hid his treasure. Some people even go so far as to interpret it as a legal statement, but I really don't feel like any legalese was part of Forrest's idea, simply because poems are just metaphorical anyways. We can't even understand the directions in it. I can hardly suspect that poetry would give any defining legal merit to something within it. So I don't think he would waste an entire stanza on it. However, what if the stanza 1, the preamble, is kind of setting the boundaries of the search area? and telling us the big picture of what we're looking at. And here's what I've extracted so far that might be useful, might be complete crap. I don't know. What if the entirety of the first stanza, additionally to describing, Forrest going and hiding his chest, is spoken from the voice of something else? We have two phrases in there that connect to other parts of the poem. The very first part, in there, using the word in, could connect to in the canyon down. So we start at where warm waters halt. We go in the canyon down. And what if, let me start over. I haven't thought about how to present this before, so I'm kind of just doing this on the fly. What if the second voice of stanza 1 is spoken from the point of the waterway? So we have Forrest going into the canyon to hide his treasure, but we also have the stream, the waterway, the creek, the river that is flowing through the canyon. I know this is a common part of the interpretation, but this could link it back to stanza 1 and define this entire space as a single waterway. There's no transition points. So that was one idea that I had to link back there into stanza 1. I'm not sure that there's, I can't tell you all the reasons why because I haven't compiled them in my brain, but rereading a lot of the material that I've done, trying to prime my mind for writing a new solve, I'm starting to get the impression that the search area is a lot tighter than I originally imagined, possibly encompassing, all of a few miles versus some of these 10, 20, 30 mile, boundary solves that I've written before. Anyways, I don't know how to explain that idea thoroughly yet. It's something that I'm tossing around in my mind. But I think stanza 1 might be the voice of both Forrest and the waterway, and we're following a single path the entire time, which would explain a lot more easily why people could solve 2 clues and walk past it. They're looking too far ahead, and the treasure is much closer than they think. I don't know. I can't think of anything more to share right now, so I'm going to sign back off. If anyone doesn't have any questions about those theories, all of our 2 viewers. But think about the campgrounds thing, or something related to it. I think there might be something there because there's got to be a reason how searchers could show up to where warm waters halt without solving those clues and not realize it. I think water is literal. I think the where warm waters halt is going to have literal water there, but it might not necessarily be the water that we're looking for. I don't know. Anyways, I will see y'all next time in stream. Yes.